Gentlemen.
Welcome to the BlockCrunch podcast, the go-to podcast for investors and builders in crypto. And before we get started, just a reminder for you guys out there, the BlockCrunch podcast is intended for informational purposes only. Neither the host nor its guests are licensed financial advisors, and nothing discussed should be construed as financial advice. Views held by BlockCrunch's guests are their own, and sponsorship messages do not constitute financial advice or endorsement. With that out of the way, let's jump right in. Now, before we get started with today's episode, I've got some great news for you. Now, a lot of you have been asking for how I analyze projects that I bring on the show. That's why I decided to create BlockCrunch VIP to share with you all the heavy research that goes on behind the scenes. Now, every week or so, our team prepares an in-depth research memo with things like sector analysis, technical concepts made simple, in-depth competitor breakdown, and even interactive models, so you can learn about the most important projects before they become important. And our team is putting in hours every week scouring Discord, Twitter, forums, and blogs to help you get an edge in crypto and understand the latest projects and themes at the deepest levels that goes way beyond just an interview. Now, in addition, we'll also host exclusive AMAs with myself to answer any of your questions. So all of these are only available to BlockCrunch VIP subscribers. And the good news is that while our interviews will always be free, the VIP tier costs less than one coffee a day. So head on over to theblockcrunch.com/VIP or click the link in the show notes below to sign up. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the BlockCrunch podcast. Now, a year ago, NFT weekly trading volume this month was over $1 billion according to the block. But today, that number is at $46 million. So it's really interesting to see just how fast the entire crypto space seemed to have shrunk. But at the same time, we still have a lot of builders who are super excited about the space, which makes me really excited about the space. And one such project that remains especially bullish on the Metaverse dream and is doubling down in this arena is Treasure DAO. Now, Treasure DAO was a crypto Twitter darling earlier this year, launching with the support of angels like myself, funds like 1KX, and a large community of fans before any investors even got involved. And despite the bear market, they have bigger plans than ever as well to create the largest shared resource for crypto games, NFT communities, and metaverses, and even spinning up their own chain on Cosmos, which we'll touch on a little bit later. So to join us to discuss their plans, what Treasure does, and how people can get involved, I'm really excited to have John and Karel from Treasure DAO on the show today in the long-awaited episode. So John, Karel, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. Now, just to get us started, can you tell us a little bit about what do both of you do at Treasure?
So I co-founded Treasure last fall with someone named Garp, who just had a baby, so he's not here. But I work in strategy there currently at Treasure.
Awesome. And Karel, I joined in March as kind of head of operations of sorts. So just overseeing a lot of growth, kind of scaling the company and organization as a whole, working across partnerships, marketing, things like that. Wearing a lot of hats.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm really excited to have you guys on because I've been following the project even, way before I invested. And one thing that really stood out to me is just how passionate the community is behind Treasure. I think something really struck a chord with people out there, and we're going to get to that in a bit. But for people who are, just starting to learn about what exactly Treasure DAO is, I won't be surprised if, they have trouble understanding the scope of what you guys are working on because, it looks like a game. It looks like its own metaverse. It has its own NFT marketplace. It has elements of a DAO. So can you help the newcomers out there in layman's term, just understand exactly what is Treasure DAO?
Yeah, so we are focused on becoming a decentralized video game publisher. It's somewhere in between a publisher and a platform. And the way it works is we use tokens and shared resources to create the underpinning for infrastructure, not only at the DeFi level, but also at the gaming level. So we view this as a large cross-game economy that can be imagined by the community and then built, interlinkages between them. What happens there, our primary token as an ecosystem is called Magic, is that if more and more games and builders incorporate this, then the games and communities can become aligned through those interoperable resources. And then they share this larger network that remains permissionless because anyone can incorporate Magic into their world and build with it. But creating aligned incentives and this extensible cross-game infrastructure, it allows us to scale the vibrant community that you were referring to, where all of the royalties earned by our organization get reinvested into new types of builders and new projects. And this flywheel of decentralization allowed us to go from a treasure or a loot derivative last fall when we just released several cards to we now have an in-house game studio. And Karel can talk to some of our growth metrics, but basically we just wanted to create a Web3 innovation that would allow for simple and meaningful experiences for builders. And so we call this sort of proof of imagination, where the community owns gaming. They have community ownership over the IP and also the infrastructure. And we launched this not really knowing where it would go. It was a fair launch, free mint project. Couldn't have had smaller ambitions for it. But the community just showed up to this thesis that the metaverse is something that we have to build, and it'll resemble more of a story than a corporate VR product.
And just to add a little bit, I think when we think about this game publisher or console, it's really this kind of like ecosystem stack. And so it kind of comprises these three layers, one being the cartridges. So in the same way that something like a Nintendo has cartridges, these are the games that are either built by us or by kind of our ecosystem of builders. Today we have 9 games and titles, 2 of which we're kind of building in-house. That's this kind of community layer that sits on top of that. So, really the social layer, the players, the contributors that, really kind of underlie a lot of that. And then all the kind of infrastructure points that John mentioned. So it's this kind of shared economy that backs Magic. We have the tooling, the resources that kind of power the broader ecosystem. And, today we have a marketplace and AMM, and we can double click on all these things.
Yeah, and we're definitely going to touch on all those different pieces, the cartridges, which you mentioned, and this idea called the Bridgeworld, as well as the marketplace. But before we move on to that, there's one really interesting comment that I think, John, you made in the last interview with someone else. You basically said that the metaverse is a story that communities write together rather than anything about gaming or graphics. And I don't know if you guys remember this project back in, I think, 2017, 2018, called Solarius, and they were trying to piece together this sci-fi storyline through blockchain, but they were way too early for the time. But ever since then, we interviewed them on the show. We've been waiting for a project that's trying to retouch on that concept. So I'm really curious about what you meant by that when you said that metaverse is a story that communities write, and it's not about the gaming or the graphics.
I'll have to check that project out. I've never heard of that. That's really interesting. I thought Loot was the first example of this. But yeah, in my mind, this is all just coming from Loot, which was sort of a lightning bolt into the space where instead of the community just being offered this product and then they just passively consume it, NFTs allow us to create types of IP and franchises that scale to the level of gaming studios, and I imagine there'll be film studios and things like that come from this. So it's the community sort of agreeing on what exists and then using crypto networks to basically codify elements of the narrative. And so the way we approach it is not through story directly, but through resources. So, our thesis is that these PFP communities and NFTs in general, like whatever the metaverse is, there'll be different guilds and groups within it, and they'll interact over resources. So if you write the resource struggle, and communities come together to find a way that they interact with each other, then goes from this sort of just being a nebulous story where everyone is writing fan fiction to an actual on-chain world. And we see it as building out game mechanisms and economies that actually exist in an immutable way that can become solid infrastructure. So this wasn't possible, formerly on the internet when it was just fan fiction, as I mentioned, but now we're moving to where these things function as real economies. And that's what I think the metaverse is.
Yeah, and Karel, anything to add there as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, John captured, I think almost everything. I think the big part where, as we look at, the tie into even what kind of Treasure has been looking to power is, I think taking these mechanisms and being able to, bring a lot of this and kind of connect it back to just the creation of games, right? And, in some ways, and, it's something that one of our partners says a lot is, now making a game is a game in itself. And And so as part of this kind of transition and, really the building blocks that are now kind of available at our disposal, we can take all these different elements that weren't, possible before, bring it on chain, and have this engaged community that is, very much kind of at the core of what we do, which is, very much bottom up, community driven, community led, different initiatives around lore, storytelling, art, that then, you can bring back to, the products that you're developing really all together.
Yeah, and I really like that you guys brought up this example of loot because in the early days, especially, I think treasure was very much compared with loot. And for listeners who are not aware, loot was a collection of NFTs that were literally just series of text against a plain background, describing items that you typically find in a fantasy game, right? Things like maybe bronze swords or chainmail and so on. And the idea was that other people would take these NFTs and build an actual game around it versus having one company, build out the entire game. And we actually explored this project back in episode, I think 163 for those who are interested. But just to kind of come back to this idea of loot and treasure, how is treasure in any way related to loot, or how has loot inspired the treasure project?
Our whole ethos was based on loot, and we initially imagined ourselves as just to be a complementary set to loot. My thinking at the time was, this is a really cool way to get the community to invent a world together, but they have no mechanism to decide what is true in that world. And that's what tokens do. That's what they do for blockchains. And then that's what they do for DAOs and these social networks. And the loot community decided to go a different direction and chose A Gold. So everything that has happened in Treasure since, initially was just us sort of, frankly, scrambling to create a metaverse because we intended this token to fit into theirs. But then we discovered that we sort of had this formula where, this can be a cradle on which many game builders and NFT builders and story writers can come in and create something around magic. So it was a happy accident that way.
That's really interesting. So you're saying that treasure, when you release your own token, the magic token, that token was supposed to be the in-game token for the loot game, but then they decided to go with their own token instead.
Yeah, there was loot, A Gold, and treasure, and they were all using this that framework that Dom came up with of the card that just has a bunch of text on it, and that's the only way that these worlds were connected. And so my thinking was, okay, well, let's just create a resource where if these are stories the community is developing, then all of these worlds are just using one primary unit of account or, utility token, whatever magic was. And the loot formula to me was so obviously going to create a community around it because it was just a perfect playbook for community building that I'd come from a DeFi background and was getting into NFTs at the infrastructure level. So I immediately recognized that as an infrastructure possibility where let's use everything we know about tokens and how that they anchor systems and do that for loot.
That's really, really interesting. And correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like you guys have diverged a lot from loot right now. So there's nothing to do with loot when it comes to treasure. Is that right?
Yeah, we still talk to their team. Tim Shell's awesome. He's doing a great job in the Lootverse. They're on a different layer too. Or Realm is their Realms is their, I guess, the biggest game in the Lootverse right now. So they're on Starknet, so that makes it kind of hard for us. But those guys are awesome. We talk to them frequently and hope to work together down the road.
Got it. Yeah, that makes sense since you guys are built on Arbitrum, which we'll talk about in a little bit as well. But I'd like to kind of come back to the core concept of treasure because the scope is so broad. And I think in some of the blog posts, you guys describe treasure as a gaming console. And within this console, there are a few pieces, which is Bridgeworld, cartridges, and Trove, all connected by the magic token. But before we dive into the individual pieces and what they are, if I'm a game developer or I'm someone trying to build a game or metaverse listening to this right now, how do I benefit from all these pieces in Treasure by being a part of Treasure?
Yeah, so I think we've moved out of the era of P2E where there's individual games. These projects have their own tokens, and the builders are completely isolated from anyone else. This model has just failed, and even for well-intentioned and temporarily successful projects, they end up losing a ton of liquidity to their token. And there's countless examples of this where they produced a great product or great game, but they couldn't achieve enough liquidity to keep this thing going. And there's just consequences to trying to build in isolation. And this is exactly what we've learned observing Ethereum and even decentralized finance, is that it makes way more sense to be a node in a larger network than to try and be the network yourself. So concretely, what that means inside Treasure is that if you're one game in a large system and you come in and say you've been building a game for 2 or 3 years and you have no idea whether you're going to be able to build a community, which is one of the hardest parts of crypto is an attention economy, or if you're going to be able to find product market fit. When you come into an ecosystem like this, the Magic token connects all these games. So it's not like a centralized video game publisher like Nintendo deciding, okay, we will ordain this title as part of like our ecosystem and pay the builders. You can just be connected to this. And then that provides a lot of benefits. The first is that you achieve a community instantly off the bat. And then the way Treasure functions is across game economies, we can actually farm attention from one game to another. And we're not only doing that like through Twitter posts, we're doing that at a literal level where these games share resources and share economic loops. So we can feed attention across games to new projects to get users interested in them. And we see the marketplace interacting there where, things like OpenSea, they've taken this horizontal approach, and we want to take a very vertical approach where over time there will be accumulated history on the marketplace of all the things that you've done and enjoyed. It'll be very gaming and a specific kind of NFT focus. And with those users in the funnel, this ability to promote games across the ecosystem will be very, very attractive to builders. But beyond that, just at a very core Web3 level, because that's sort of like a Web2 value premise. And then we see this as something much more radical, is that when you build on-chain game economies, these are mechanisms that exist forever that anyone can hook into. And this makes building you can achieve it much more quickly. So it's not just incorporating the Magic token. I mean, a lot of what we've been doing in Bridgeworld over the last year, we can talk about, is building sophisticated ways to farm NFTs, to value them relative to each other. And this is things that people can then link into these on-chain mechanisms. Another example is, so Small Brains was our NFT where it's this pretty silly project where you get a monkey with a head and then you stake it and its IQ goes up every day. And then once the IQ reaches 50 points, the head would actually get bigger. We were really proud of this. No one had done an evolving NFT before in crypto. And we're just taking this to the limit. And, imagine if these monkeys, their heads are controlled by something called the school contract. Now imagine if there was a school contract that anyone could hook into permissionlessly, and it's not controlling the head size of the monkey. Maybe it's like some sort of skill metric. Now you can create very huge games across all of the NFT community. And it would function like a decentralized MMORPG where they're just sharing mechanisms, and then the builders can trust that their characters are roughly comparable because of it's being controlled by a single contract or measurement. So we're just scratching the surface of what this all means, but we really think that this will be like, even when traditional game publishers, they'll see the advantage of being a part of a network. And then also just crypto natives will realize, wow, this is the exact same thing as DeFi, where it makes building and achieving liquidity so much faster and more sustainable.
And we've been spending a lot of time just working with builders, and so I think a lot of the value proposition really built around that, and spending some time with us is, I think it's really around that kind of player base, being able to tap into that. It's being able to tap into, I think a lot of the just like, crypto native, like very thoughtful, novel applications of like what Web3 can enable within gaming, and doing it within this kind of broader ecosystem. And so, we've spent a lot of time just thinking through what a kind of like incentive sort of framework could look like, such that, everyone can really benefit from just longer term alignment, with Magic, with our token, with, all the kind of different resources and mechanisms that, John is kind of describing. How can this kind of benefit the broader ecosystem as a whole? And, I think we're very much in the mindset of, this kind of rising tide will lift all boats. And, by creating a stronger kind of network and stronger ecosystem, all of the games that, someday, kind of make their way onto Treasure, will be able to benefit from all these different things.
Yeah, and it's so interesting that you guys are kind of starting from the base layer, basically trying to build infrastructure for other people to build games. But there's so many pieces when it comes to infrastructure, right? You could be building a gaming engine, like Unity or Unreal. You could be building maybe DeFi rails for in-game purchases. So how do you decide what to build out? Like, what are some of the significant market gaps out there that you guys identified and said, hey, we're going to build something here because there's a huge gap here, and a lot of devs are telling us that, hey, this is what we need right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you're right. There is like you have to make a decision between the visual and the underlying infrastructure, the economic infrastructure. And the thing I loved about Loot and was so intuitive to me was that you know it's risky to try and produce one type of visual representation for a metaverse, and these are going to be very ephemeral. And we don't know anything about it. We know a ton about DeFi, and these will be permanent on-chain things. And if they're successful, they can be immutable contracts that are used for decades to build all kinds of Web3 games and systems. And then the more entrenched they become, it's like trying to fork Uniswap at a certain point. There was a moment of time to do that, but that's long gone now. And we think that there's really neat things you can do at the infrastructure level that will be crucial for all of crypto gaming. My personal belief is that we're moving out of this phase where NFTs are dominated by flippers, hoping that they've minted $1 million NFT for 0.03 ETH or whatever. And the marketplaces are going to change also underneath the hood. So we're going to go from this highly speculative phase of hoping that you've won the lottery to these are real products that people are paying much less money for, and they're not expecting a return on it. It's just an input to a product. And underneath the hood to the marketplace, you see SudoSwap. This was a 0 to 1 innovation in my mind because success or like the highest volume NFTs will be nearly fungible. They will be skins and in-game assets and treasures. So they should be traded out of liquidity pools. And what's going to end up happening is that all these professional NFT traders that have just sat around OpenSea all day flipping these and then occasionally getting lucky, and then the luckiest ones we're going to see market makers coming around. And if they can't adapt to this world where they are liquidity providers for these very high volume, high velocity pools, and then they make money through the economic infrastructure as opposed to flipping and hodling. That's what happened with DeFi and why most Bitcoiners got left behind. They didn't understand that the industry was changing and required an increasing level of sophistication to profit from it. So, gaming, NFTs, and all the innovation is going to be happening at the economic level in the next few years. And that's the sandbox we want to play in.
Yeah, and I love that you used the term 0 to 1 to describe pseudo, because we actually wrote a memo for some of our VIP subscribers back in June, and the exact title was why pseudo AMM is the 0 to 1 moment for NFTs. And I absolutely agree with what you have to say there. And Karel, I'm curious if you have anything to add there as well.
Yeah, I'd say like all of those things that John was describing, like that's like, like moving the needle forward and like, seeing how we can really like shape the industry from a treasure perspective and kind of creating that base layer. I think if I go back to your original question of like, how do we decide what to build and what to kind of like focus on and spend our time on? I mean, there's so many different things. And so it's like a kind of careful balance of, how, in what way do we really kind of like lean in and lean forward, which, John is spending a lot of his time on just kind of thinking through like what's next. There's another part of it, which, I think, as we've built a lot of the kind of base layer, the infrastructure, the magic kind of economy that backs all of it, it was also just creating the proofs of concepts to, leverage all of these different things. And so with something like a Bridgeworld and something like a Small Brain or Smallverse, like these were, sets of IPs, brands, titles, games that, leverage the things that we were building so that we can kind of see if it worked. And also kind of, put us in the builder seat as well. And so, over time, we've brought in other cohorts of games and external kind of studios, builders who have come into the mix. And so, we're spending a lot of time just, learning a bit more about, what their needs are. And, I think now that we have a really kind of great, I'd say, foundation to really, springboard off from, is leaning into a lot of these different elements. So there's an innovation component, and then there's, maybe some of this like more operational kind of like even distribution, how do we go to market? How do we, kind of advance and support a lot of our builders now at this stage of where we are. And so definitely as we, move into the rest of this year and 2023, there's going to be, I'd say, two of these different, I'd say, ships kind of moving in parallel.
Yeah, and speaking of ideas that you guys picked to work on, now one of the first big things that you guys shipped is this thing called Bridgeworld. So can you guys explain what is Bridgeworld and maybe some examples of games and how they have integrated with it?
Yeah, absolutely. So Bridgeworld started off as after I mentioned we moved from a loot derivative to realizing, okay, we could actually build our own ecosystem. Let's try this. We started developing the story, the native metaverse to Treasure, and in this world there are these characters called legions, and their principal aim is to acquire magic because magic is the thing that powers their world. So they quest for treasures. They use those treasures to craft, ways to earn magic, and then they were summoning more legions. And over time, as we were building out the code base for this, we made it. The world got more and more complex. So initially, it started where you just stake your loot card and you earn magic, and then you had your legion, and you could just stake your legion and earn magic. And then we introduced quests, and now we've moved into this harvesters phase. And so the way harvesters work, so you can think of them as giant staking pools, but they have to be activated by lots of people. So it's very difficult for one person to be able to own the entirety of a harvester. It would just cost too much because there's tens of millions of magic and different NFTs currently in these. But so groups of people, guilds, have to cooperate to craft harvester parts to latch onto these harvesters, which we think of like as enormous mechanical animals just walking around Bridgeworld. And then these parts allow them to start diverting magic back to the legions like rain catchers. And so harvesters are staking pools that are a little more complex. We didn't want it to be pay to win. So you have to build them with others and you have to maintain them. And then soon people will be able to harvest corruption points and actually lob it against others to take over their harvester or weaken them. And we're doing this because the major outcome in DeFi was just plutocracy, and once you control the network, you can just sit there and nothing changes. And we wanted to make the opposite, where the whole loot thesis was that this is a world that the community builds actively, and so you have to maintain involvement and stay up to date on Bridgeworld. But so that was this view we were operating in of, okay, this is Bridgeworld as a game, but it was pretty insular because our goal was magic is going to be the thing that connects the entire Web3 gaming ecosystem. How do we get there? Increase the circulation of magic. So then, as we were talking about harvesters, our economist came up with this great idea and was like, let's say we have dozens of these things. Initially, we're going to start with one or two. We started with two to just kind of test this out. But harvesters can actually be other games, and not just like games in the Treasure ecosystem. If someone builds a great MMORPG somewhere in crypto, we can partner with this organization and say, hey, like we want this format to be one of the harvesters, and then your players can earn magic. And then you could even do it with marketplace metrics, where to help new projects that have a really explosive burst onto the scene, and maybe that they are earning the magic from the harvesters there. So what this means is that Treasure can just kind of be the underpinning to lots of different games. And rather than these builders going off and trying to build isolated liquidity and succeed on their own, this becomes something where if Nintendo has a failed title, the organization continues. And same thing with a harvester. If a game fails, you just slowly retire it in the least destructive way to those holders. Or if it becomes outdated, you do the same, and then you ramp up the emissions to the successful products. And going forward, we're going to explore, this approach to gaming, where we're actually just the nexus between those things. Because our view of Treasure's metaverse is we're the bridge between lots of different ones rather than our own unique one.
Hey guys, I'm really excited to tell you more about one of my favorite products in crypto right now, DYDX. This is a team I've known since 2018, and they've built one of the best exchange venues out there that also happens to be decentralized and mobile friendly. Now listen until the end because there's an opportunity for savvy traders out there as well. And here are just a few reasons why I like DYDX over other exchanges. First, it's very liquid. It processes $2 to $3 billion every day in volume and has 35 perpetual swaps as of this recording, which means you can trade things like Ethereum, Bitcoin, Doge, Solana, and most of the most popular assets with up to 20x leverage in the venue today. Now second, it's also extremely cheap. And if you're down bad from the bear market, you don't have to worry about gas fees at all because there is no gas fee on Starkware Layer 2 where DYDX is built on. Now that brings me to my next point as well. It's incredibly fast. Unlike other layer 2 and high-speed dexes, you don't actually have to wait to withdraw your assets anymore. And as an additional point, by using Starkware, DYDX also provides user with increased security and privacy. And my personal favorite feature is the cross-margin feature, which means I can seed one account with USDC and trade across multiple markets from there without needing to start sub-accounts because I really hate managing so many different sub-accounts. And their iOS mobile app is also live right now, and it's amazing because it's compatible with MetaMask, Coinbase Wallet, Coin98, Huobi Wallet, and a lot of the most popular mobile wallets out there. And it's available for people outside of the US or sanctioned countries today. And one last thing, one exciting opportunity is their competitions. The most recent tier in the $10,000 equity tier have won over $95,000 in rewards. And you can get started with as low as $500 in equity to compete for prizes. So if you're already trading, might as well get paid to do it. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, I highly recommend that you head on over to dydx.exchange to learn more. And I thank them for sponsoring this episode. And it sounds like the primary objective of the Bridgeworld game right now is accruing more magic tokens, either by the initial way of kind of mining for these tokens, by staking your NFTs, or by building these harvesters. So doesn't that sound a little bit like PTE, where the primary use case for the token is printing it as inflation to incentivize people? How is that sustainable over time?
So if you think about the 1 year vision of where we're going, which is that, let's say, so we have our own chain, we have lots of games on it, and the way people are able to onboard, they can quickly buy Magic. They don't need any other token besides Magic, and they're just there to game. And so this is where we think gaming is going. Is it's moving towards ecosystems, and each new participant is less and less a speculator and more of a player. And they will like the ability to contribute to the narrative, but they're not doing it hoping for giant returns. So the early Magic farmers were bootstrapping this network that's capable of building, like a growing product suite. And Magic will move from something. P2E is kind of just circular. It's similar to the governance token phenomenon in DeFi, where the network was valuable because you get a token, but the token was valuable because of the network. And instead of just doing this kind of the staking game, we want to move to a productive use of Magic in the ecosystem. So with a chain, like that's the best example of how the token, the people who hold large quantities of it have to be using it to contribute to the security and growth of the network. But also with AMMs, you see like a token that is the base pair there. There's someone who's taking a risk with their capital of incurring impermanent loss to help provide liquidity to the entire ecosystem. So we're building out an AMM with Magic as the base pair with all of our partners. The idea being, if they're a successful game, then they will receive more Magic emissions or grants. So they will benefit from the growth of this token, which they not only get more of, but like they can actively shape its emission and its dynamics. And game builders can't do that with ETH. It's something that is controlled by someone else. But this is an organization token that we can finely tune to support us as we need. So Magic started off where people were acquiring lots of it, and our community, the really core community from the early days, understands this vision where they are doing it because they're building out infrastructure with us.
Yeah, and there's I'd say another piece of it, which I think as these builders, the games, and the players look to accumulate Magic, a lot of it is for productive kind of uses, and so a lot of what we've seen kind of arise is this kind of emergence of games as guilds, where they are looking to kind of accumulate magic, but more so because it's a lot of it is also being used within their own kind of native game loops as well. And so some games are using magic at the core, including kind of our first party titles and the game called Battlefly. Other games are, they have their own native tokens as well, but they can still use magic in a kind of productive and meaningful way, that really kind of augments a lot of their efforts and really designing kind of a rich and vibrant game world within that as well. And so there is this, I'd say, like interplay between all of that. And so having this, extra kind of incentive on top of that while being part of an ecosystem, it's something that we can kind of support, from the treasure perspective on top of all that.
Got it. So just to synthesize here, so you guys have built Bridgeworld, which is your own metaverse, which is almost this meta game where people are incentivized to accrue as much magic as possible. But I think the real magic, no pun intended, the real magic of the situation is that you're able to convince other people to also be incentivized to accrue magic. Because I think one of the huge issues that we saw from talking to a lot of metaverse projects is that they have their own token, they have their own metaverse, and they always want other people to build games in their metaverse. And we see this like Decentralized and in Sandbox as well. But for game studios, the incentive is not to add value to other people's ecosystem, but to build out their own metaverse, but use their own tokens. But you guys seem to have, somehow cracked the code here to a certain extent with things like cartridges, where you're seeing, other people build cartridges or build games on top of Magic. So can you talk a little bit about the concept of cartridges and maybe some examples of games that are building on top of Magic today?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and maybe just to bridge that point, so what we did see, earlier in the year was one of our games actually looking to acquire kind of Magic, and we had a bit of a divestment with them, and they, spent 4.5 million just to buy a Magic so that they could use that for their own kind of game. And so
This is
this
not
is
still
something.
internally, right?
No, it was we had that to be used internally, but yeah, it was ratified by the DAO, went to kind of approval, and that was something that was kind of interesting. And so I think we're seeing a lot more of that, where Magic will play increasingly kind of this meaningful role, and it really depends. It'll take different kind of shapes and sizes and different flavors as to how Magic is used, but it's certainly interesting. And so I think with these cartridges and these games, and I'd say there are different kind of like levels to this, right? There are games that kind of come in from kind of day one, and we had this initial cohort of I'd say kind of like 7 external games that we brought on kind of earlier in the year. And so these really are kind of genre agnostic, pretty kind of diverse in terms of what they do. There's and I won't go through all of them, but I'd say 3 of the kind of highlights beyond the ones that we're building. There's one called Battlefly, and this is more of this kind of like their flagship game will be a bit more of this kind of like idle strategy game, but they also launched this kind of 3D obstacle racer game really as a, I'd say really engaging, streamable kind of, interesting kind of tournament play that, people can kind of compete with. We have another game called Knights of the Ether, and, they're building kind of this roguelike deck builder game, inspired by Slay the Spire. So and then we have this other one called Tales of Lyria, immersive kind of 3D MMORPG, world bosses, kind of like very fun, very kind of, engaging. And so, and so many others that are kind of built on top of that. We have party games, we have, I'd say like more of these hyper casual titles. There's one that, or well, 2 that I'd highlight that we're really excited about that have not kind of launched yet, but we've been in talks with for a really long time to really try to bring them into the ecosystem. And we're about to kick off or very soon kind of our second cohort, so they should come live soon. But there's another game called The Beacon. They've been at it for over a year, kind of almost 2, I think, of building this roguelike kind of dungeon crawler experience. And so being able to attract games like that has been interesting. And then this other mix of I'd say this like more so hyper casual Jackbox style kind of game that can really attract and appeal to the masses. So we have this game that is in the works called Hovercats, which is super interesting. They just partnered with YouTube to run their kind of game on experience, where it was the world's fastest crossword solver versus the world, and so everyone could essentially kind of compete together and jump in and try to solve a crossword kind of together with a broader community. So there's so many different, I'd say, like, flavors of games that are being built out, and I'd say overall it's really designed to be, there will be a game for anyone, and it'll kind of appeal to whatever your kind of taste is.
And these are all games built by, third parties, right? Not by the internal kind of Treasure core
That's
team.
right.
And this is really interesting. I'd love to double click on that because, if I issued a token today and I, go to game developers and say, hey, build your game, but you're going to use my token. They're basically going to tell me, go F yourself. I'm going to build my own token. So, what is the thing that's pulling these developers to incorporate Magic into all these different game types?
I think it's the community that has banded around Treasure. The Beacon, they've been working on this game for a couple of years, and Tales of Valyria had been working on their game quite a while, and asked their community where they should go, and their community said overwhelmingly to go to Arbitrum to be part of this blossoming network of decentralized builders and games. And so if you're building for 2 or 3 years and you're proud of what you do, but you're not sure you're going to get PMF, like, it's kind of like deciding whether or not you want to. It's an easier decision than deciding whether or not you want to go with a video game publisher, because the whole impetus behind these indie studios is they didn't want to be exploited by the centralized entity. But we removed that because we're a DAO, and the founding team, we tried to extract as little value as possible from this ecosystem so it could resemble an indie studio, but it has all the advantages of a major publisher in terms of the unified community that I mentioned earlier. And the other thing I wanted to say, I forgot, is that it's important for games to have their own tokens, and it helped us as an ecosystem because as a free mint project, we created this token, and our idea was if we create things of value, then it's going to drive value back to our token, and our organization's treasury will now be worth things that we can divest. And that's what we've done, and how we're standing up our internal game studio that we made a multi-million-dollar investment into acquiring developers and talent for. And other games need to do this too, where they have to have something to provide momentum for their internal economy. But the way we see it differently than P2E is that P2E had this 2-token model inside the same game. And even Luna, to an extent, was this 2-token model, but very self-referential. And if the project itself collapsed, the equilibrium, that's not a very good basis. But the second token should be the ecosystem token. So, if a game comes in and they have their own thing, it's powering their builders and then they're driving value back to it. If Magic is the base pair at the AMM level, the unit of account across the ecosystem, and as the builders succeed in this ecosystem, they have bigger exposure and capture of this token that provides the resiliency of the entire network of games because it survives the failure of single games. That's the 2-token model that'll succeed, and that's where we see Magic fitting in.
And I know it's still early days, but can you give us an example of maybe how a game is both issuing their own token as a cartridge, but also how they're incorporating the Magic token into that process?
Yeah, Karel,
Yeah,
you want to
absolutely.
jump into Tales of Weird? Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, definitely. So something like a Tales of Lyria, you would start off by leveraging Magic, through the marketplace or to mint your character. This was kind of early days, and so being able to acquire your primary NFT, using Magic. From there, and they're an example where they also have their own native token as well. Actually, two of them, and so there is this continued sort of interplay where Magic plays a role. They have something else that's called Elm, and then something else that's called Metals, and so they all have a role to play within kind of their universe and Metaverse. And so as we've spent a lot of time working with them, as we've onboarded them, but also throughout the process as well. So John mentioned our kind of economist, PETA. He spends a lot of his time just working through the overall kind of tokenomics, the game design, the different loops that will help to kind of inform a lot of those things. And so and with their more kind of MMORPG experience, you can use magic to then craft an item, and have this then have some other kind of productive use within their world. They have this concept of world bosses where they can use the magic that we provide them on an ongoing basis through kind of magic emissions. We have this treasure improvement proposal that allowed for us to emit magic into their world so that they can use it for different kind of reward mechanisms. And so through this world boss framework that they've put together, not only is there the use of magic and kind of these NFTs where if players band together, they coordinate, they defeat a boss, they get magic and other kind of rewards through the native token for that game on top of other items. We've actually also seen this kind of crossover where if you own an NFT, not from us, but also our other games, so something like a Smallverse or something like a Life DAO, these are our other games that are kind of touching into this. And so if you own an NFT, you can use that to achieve some sort of boost to your character as well. And so it's really not kind of this interoperability with kind of Treasure alone. It's also with all of the other games. And so for me, my dream is to really kind of create this like almost Super Smash Brothers experience where there's so many intersection points with all of the games that are kind of happening and taking place. And the fact that they can design their own kind of worlds and sets of IP, but have this kind of intersection point, which we kind of see in a lot of ways with Bridgeworld, where this is where everyone comes together to kind of collide and have this shared experience.
So you have Bridgeworld, which is your own metagame and metaverse, and you have these cartridges, which are games built by other people leveraging their own tokens, but also the magic token. And then you have Trove, which is the marketplace for all these games. So I guess zooming out a little bit for the magic token in the long term, what do you foresee as the biggest use case or the biggest reason why people would be buying magic tokens?
From a player perspective, to be part of this ecosystem where there's a single token that they use across the entire network, and that's what ETH has done for all of the crypto submarkets. But this will be when we bring in traditional gamers and non-crypto natives. It's very valuable to have a token that the DAO has a lot of control over and can fine tune the mechanisms. And it'll function the same way where people prefer the convenience of one unit of account across all of their activities. But Magic does it in a very localized way. And it'll be just, that's the vision, is to have a chain where even the wallet is abstracted away and that people just immediately get to it. They're using this token called Magic, which our community, we found that they have an attachment even just to the name and the concept behind it. And it powers everything they do in that world. And, as Web3 sophistication grows and you can build, we've seen like the first instance of this of alpha groups that use NFTs to basically gatekeep, but once there's like elements of friendship or guilds built into marketplaces and other level of infrastructures, a single token like that will be really valuable at tying all of these sub networks together.
I think you raised a really, really interesting analogy, which is this analogy to ETH. Because for the longest time, I'm trying to think of, okay, how do I come up with a simple analogy to explain what Magic is actually trying to do? And to me, it's not really. I think the gaming studio example makes a lot of sense. But what makes more intuitive sense to me as a crypto native is Ethereum itself. Because if you look at all the DeFi applications, a lot of them seed liquidity for their own tokens against ETH. All of them are building on ETH. A lot of them accrue ETH in the treasury. And I guess that's the type of network effect that you're trying to create, but in a much more kind of specific and narrow focus. Would you say that's kind of the correct framework to think about the Magic vision?
Yeah, absolutely. That's yeah, you nailed it. And we have a lot of internal discussions about what kind of tokens become money, and because that was sort of our interest, was to create a metaverse money. And almost without fail, it's always the native token of a blockchain. And there have been instances like Ohm and Temple that have tried to do it. And the stablecoin is different because it's pegged to something outside of this world. But anything else that just kind of floats like a satellite above, the real economy, it has to have some sort of level of work or or stake involved for it to acquire the hardness of money. And for us, like, we want to be where the community works so hard and put so much effort, and so many systems are built on top of this thing that they imagine. And also they use the token to decide like what's real by subsidizing specific projects and views of the metaverse. And it's in a very loosey-goosey way, it does function like a network in that way, where Magic is anchoring the community and letting it decide what's real, like block production.
That is fascinating. And I think that really leads us into the app chain thesis as well, and which I think is, clearly something you guys are leaning into as well, because currently, obviously, Treasure and the Magic token are an Arbitrum, but it seems like you guys have plans to build out your own app chain on Cosmos. So I feel like we've already touched on this a few times across, a few of the different questions already. But can you help us understand, why are you guys doing that? And, what was the main decision? What was the main kind of motivation for that?
Yeah, so we have a really good relationship with Arbitrum, where they've been if any games or even other DeFi projects or anything else, once they come to Arbitrum, we meet with them very regularly, and they've been extremely helpful. And the AnyTrust thing was something that we didn't learn more about until we were already pretty integrated into the ecosystem. And so we're looking at that now. The idea of building similar to Cosmos, you could have an app specific chain where the advantage of Cosmos to me is that self-sovereignty, where you can have these chains that are hyper-focused on their goal. And the DAO, or even the founding team, is curating like what products are available in there to control congestion. And governance, can be very focused on achieving a specific goal, and the ecosystem doesn't become diluted by competing visions. And so we, outside of Cosmos, when we look at AnyTrust, we want to recreate that, where it's the DAO curates and permissions what's available on this chain, similar to a video game publisher or platform. And there's lots of advantages to app-specific chains besides governance and the self-sovereignty. It's also just a congestion level, where you look at something like Polygon, it's very effective right now, but they have every kind of ecosystem and niche in crypto there. And I'm a crypto maximalist. I think every ecosystem in crypto is going to scale 100x to 1000x in terms of just its adopters. So I have no idea how any project building on Polygon can feel comfortable that sidechain can, eventually support them. And sidechains also have their implicit security risks that rollups don't. So being based on Arbitrum for our assets that require like strong security assumptions, and then using like an AnyTrust for gaming, where most of your transactions involve really low cost items, where it wouldn't be the end of the world if you lose a consumable or something like that. That vision makes a lot of sense to us for what Web3 gaming as a platform is going to look like.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And John, I know you were a DeFi guy before, and even looking at projects like DYDX, when they kind of decide to move to their own app chain on Cosmos, because they realize, well, as a perp exchange, we don't really need interoperability with, an NFT marketplace on Ethereum. We don't need to, fight for the same block space. It makes sense to have their own kind of ecosystem. I think that also really applicable here. Obviously, you guys need to be composable with all these other games, but you don't really need to be composable with, a perp exchange on Ethereum and be fighting for the same block space, right? So I think that makes a ton of sense. And I guess
and the
just
DY,
yeah,
I was just going to say the DYDX thing is also just the economics of ZK proving right now, where on Starknet, they're basically taking a haircut on your entire revenue. And it doesn't function like a chain where, you just pay the validators for simply validating, and it's not. And so Arbitrum, if ZK proofs is like the winning solution, will just adapt the consensus layer. And we really like that about them. But I think the DYDX moving to Cosmos had a lot to do with, I think everyone agrees that zero knowledge is like the way the future is going, particularly for gaming. It makes a lot of sense. Like strategies for guilds need to be shielded to some extent, but the technology is too immature. And so that the business models just end up being very like value extractive to organizations choosing to do it right now.
And it's funny you say that because my next question actually ties with this concept of technology being too early. And I'm curious to get both of your takes on this as well. Now, because now we have the basics of what you guys are trying to do, I think a lot of VCs out there listening are probably thinking, well, it sounds like it's really sci-fi. It sounds like it's simply too early for something like Treasure before we even have, these mature metaverses. So I'm curious about what your rebuttal is to that. Why is now the most exciting time to be part of Treasure?
To me, I mean, I get goosebumps at how similar this is to DeFi, where people just showered money on these 2017 ICOs that were basically CDFI, and what ended up happening was I was really involved in DeFi in the discords in 2018 and 2019, and there was just these rumblings of, and you see it now with SudoSwap. I'd like to throw our name in the conversation, EtherOrcs, and this is the future. Like this vision of interoperability, composability, and just a truly Web3 native approach to structuring organizations and building new kinds of products. It's happening right now. And the adoption phase will be exactly like DeFi. It's going to happen in a hockey stick. No one, unless you were paying attention, would have seen it coming. And it's going to happen from really small teams that were thinking ahead. So, I mean, I just think it's underfunded, but it's almost like hilarious because that happened in DeFi too, and like we all saw how that turned out.
Yeah, the thing I would add there is, I think definitely we're early, but I think we've, in the last 9 months, I think our birthday is 5 6 days actually. No, so 9 months since we moved to Arbitrum, but I think early September, that's when John and Garp kind of started the project, and so birthday's coming up, and so within that time frame, we've been able to write over 260 million in marketplace volume, and this is just specifically through Magic. We've been able to kind of create and really build the dominant kind of NFT ecosystem here in Arbitrum. And, we account for over 95% of really all of the transactions here that are NFT related. And so I'd say a lot of the kind of early signs of traction, I think we've been really building towards, having this kind of stable foundation where, we can continue innovating, continue kind of, moving that needle forward. But in the meantime, kind of prove out, I'd say, for us, the next big stage is, how can we kind of, create two simultaneous games that are using the same token, using kind of Magic, having this, I'd say, like network growth and kind of interoperability that is really kind of proven out, through productive kind of flows of Magic and all of the NFTs, between different parts of the ecosystem. And so I think we're in the early innings of seeing that play out. And so, a lot of our focus in recent times, has definitely been around, not only can we kind of grow the ecosystem and continue kind of, innovating, but also just making this experience so much easier to get on. And so, I think we're early in the sense of kind of adoption and early in the sense of kind of this L2 friction that already exists. And so as we think about just, kind of onboarding both builders but also players, and so things like fiat on ramps, things like, certainly centralized exchange listings and things like that, a lot of these partnerships are fledging, and so we're excited for what the fall will kind of bring as we move towards that.
And how much volume did you say the marketplace generated?
265 million US, and that's kind of 105 Magic kind of equivalent.
Oh wow!
That
And
was
that's
from
like during a
two
bear market.
yeah, like through we launched I think in November or when it's been so long now,
Yeah,
but that was
November.
mostly
Yeah.
from almost all from just the two collections we had made, Bridgeworld and Small Brains.
Got it. Got it. Yeah, that's amazing. And I really encourage people to check out the project. Not inducing people to buy any tokens, but really just go check out the games, check out what these guys are working on, because I really think it's something special and incredibly unique, and that's why I'm excited to be involved here. So just to close out, John, Karel, what are the best channels for people to really get into what Treasure is building and really get involved, as community members or maybe as game builders?
Yeah, just come into the Discord, and there's lots of ways to be involved as a builder. You know, it's sort of just kind of a large, boundaryless collective of technologists and storytellers, artists, game designers. We have someone of every stripe working in this organization. And our ethos since the beginning was, we gave everything away for free, and we really do think that this is like, we can build an alternative model to exploitative forms of game development, and even just artistic distribution. So if this is something that appeals to you, we're extremely passionate about it, and the community is like very vibrant and growing. So just come into the Discord, and I'm sure there's a way we can find to match your skills with what Treasure's doing right now.
Yeah, to read it out, it's discord.gg/treasure DAO, one word. And then on Twitter, I'd say this is also a good spot for you to get the latest. So twitter.com/treasure_DAO. But yeah, definitely. I mean, I'd say a lot of our core team actually, they started as community contributors, and so it was a good kind of funnel for them to really lean into and kind of take ownership. And so I think as we think about building the DAO and scaling the team, and kind of growing what we're doing, is really going to be community led. And so a lot of the initiatives that we've been spending our time on has been, how do we kind of, better equip them, but also empower and reward them for a lot of those things. So kind of on top of that, there are certain kind of incentives that are in place to be a part of really the bigger picture. So we're excited to partner and work with really anyone.
Yeah, absolutely. That was really helpful, and we'll be sure to include some of those resources in the show notes below. And for people who want to learn more, we're going to prepare a more in-depth research memo on what Treasure is, how it works, examples of games, and how the token works, and so on. So definitely make sure you subscribe to Block Crunch VIP as well. Well, once again, thank you so much for coming on the show, John, Karel. This has been really fun.
Thanks. Yeah, I did just want to say to all your listeners, I used to just read Jason's tweets like in 2019, and I learned so much about DeFi. So this was a huge pleasure. I'm getting to do this.
Yeah, thank you so much for reading my shit posts, and I'll keep them coming.
Absolutely.
All right, that's it for this week's episode of the Block Crunch podcast. So thank you so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to subscribe on your favorite apps. And in case you didn't know, this interview is also available as a video on YouTube. And if you tag the Block Crunch on Twitter this week and tell us what you liked about this episode, I'll be sure to respond to you as well. Now, if you'd like to go even deeper, we have a VIP tier where every week or so, we write an in-depth research brief or investment memo on a project. And we'll have exclusive AMAs with myself where I answer all your questions as well. Now, we already have analysts from some of the top funds and companies in crypto as subscribers. So if you're serious about getting an edge in crypto, head on over to theblockcrunch.com/VIP to learn more. And once again, thanks for supporting the show, and I'll see you next week.